All right, everybody, welcome back to Transitions for More. I'm your host, Mike Ergo, and I am joined by recurring co-host and guest of the show, Doc Shauna Springer. Shauna, welcome back.
Good morning, Mike. Good to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm always glad to talk to you. You know that. Today, we're talking about something really exciting that you had a big hand in, and that is the book Beyond the Military. Like you and I just listened to my talk with retired Lieutenant Colonel Jason Roncoroni. Today we're talking about the book Beyond the Military. Shauna, what can you tell me about our interviewee today, Jason Roncoroni, and about the book?
Sure. Well, Jason is a dear friend of mine and really one of the smartest people I know. First of all, he's a retired Lieutenant Colonel and a former aviation battalion commander from the 101st Airborne Division, served 33 months in combat. And one of the parts of his story that's interesting in relation to our book, Beyond the Military, is that he transitioned out of the military twice.
Yeah, he had a couple opportunities to do that.
Yeah, he had a couple opportunities to do that. He went to West Point and served in the military for many years and then transitioned out and came back in after 9/11 and then transitioned out when he later retired from his military career.
Yeah, that's the cool thing. He has the perfect resume to talk about transition, because I mean he's done that in peacetime and he's done it in wartime. So through two different stations in life too.
Absolutely, he has so much perspective to add from his lived experience, and kind of within himself. There's the lived experience and the expertise. Jason's written some nationally recognized white papers on transition, and has a really big following on LinkedIn for his really insightful articles on transition. He's been publishing one a week for the past 3 weeks on different topics, and there's been quite a lot of pickup on that. And it's the kind of thing where, I read them the day before and kind of reflect on them and say, this is something that people I don't know how they could disagree with this. If they've gone through transition themselves, they're going to resonate with so much of what Jason says, because it's not just his story. So many of the truths that he shares are just characteristic of so many of the leaders and the service members that I've worked with as they're transitioning out.
One of the things I really like about the book is the way it is written, and there's a conversational aspect part of it. And then there's also the way he writes it logically for someone who's been in the military, who can understand the language, if this, then that, and taking something that is confusing and putting it in terms you can understand. Just the way he wrote it made it easy to follow, and because this is can be just such a confusing topic. Those are one of the things that really stood out to me.
Yeah, our goal is, to be clear, it's to fundamentally change the way that we support service members in transition. And so the best way to bring ideas to them in this way was to write it like a conversation. So as we went through the writing process, we really checked each other on, especially he checked me, I think, and a little bit me with him, around any terminology that would not land for people. We really, he wanted to encourage me to just talk to people like I would in a consultation session. So in the same way, he writes about this from a very approachable perspective.
The topic of relationships is something that you're very familiar with, something you worked with a lot of veterans, both during your time in the VA and afterwards. And you've even written a book, Marriage for Equals. Tell us about how you inserted relationships into the transition.
Yeah, okay. So here's the backstory on that. So Jason sends me the manuscript, and it's about 300 pages. And he sends it to me as a friend and a trusted early reviewer for something that he's writing. And I read it and I think, this is brilliant and so different and so sorely needed. He really addressed the identity crisis that is at the core of transition struggle for so many of the veterans that I've worked with. And so I read through this manuscript and I said, this is so good. And have you thought about the relationship adjustment part of transition? Because I have seen so many patients whose relationships become very badly strained, or who go through a divorce or a breakup as they're in the transition from the military. And it's clearly a high risk time for close relationships. So if you're going to do an integrative program of transition that looks at the psychological and cultural parts of transition, let me add the relational part of transition, if you would. So he said, well, I'm interested. Send me what you've got. And so I tried to keep it to about 80 pages because he already had most of what is really needed to make this program work. And so I sent him about 80 pages on relationships. And as you said, I had written a book back in 2012. It came out the very week my son was born. And so it was kind of one of those things where I feel like there's a lot of good stuff in that book. And at the same time, there's a lot of ways I would have written it differently. I think at that time, I was still kind of institutionalized in the sense of like writing from a place of like, let me show you what big words I know, and I don't want to write that way anymore. That's not who I am at core. I had to work myself away from that mode of thought, that the purpose of writing is to not look as impressive as we possibly can and use the most SAT words, but whether your writing lands and whether it changes people's lives and perspectives. And so I really have worked on that. So now I'm kind of glad that very few people know about my 2012 book, because my voice as a writer has really changed around that goal. So I got to kind of take all the content from that book that I know is hitting a chord, because I had written a number of articles for Psychology Today, and there's like over 1.7 million hits on those writings on Psychology Today. So I knew it was hitting a chord, and I got to take it and apply it for military couples in this book. And so that's how Jason and I ended up kind of coming together around this collaboration.
What makes transition so hard in the arena of relationships?
Yeah, so there's different vulnerabilities depending on what your relationship status is. So I wrote this in 3 sections. What I noticed among patients that were single when they were getting out of the military was that there was a special vulnerability because they lost their entire family system. And by family, I mean people in the military that provided a relationship network that made their lives meaningful. It doesn't matter if they're blood related, people in the military become family, even closer than family that people sometimes grew up with. And so losing your entire family is a time of basically a huge attachment wound, a huge vulnerability that way. And so some of the single men and women that I worked with would tend to jump pretty quickly into relationships with people they didn't know very well. And then these relationships would break up, and then they would be at risk for all kinds of things that, are bad outcomes, basically. So that was a vulnerability. So I wrote for those people who are single to give them a model and an understanding of how to really slow down and think about the relationship you're building, but not to jump into just one relationship. I also talk about social diversification, which is basically don't put all your money in one stock. Build out, like you did in the military, a community of support. Build out, if you were speaking Marine, build out your fire team of the people that you love and you trust the most, those 3 other people that you can say anything to, and then build out another round or 2 of people. I talk about social diversification. So social diversification is having that fire team of people that you really deeply love and trust, that you can come to with anything in your life and they will have your back. But then you also want to build out a deeper level of support from people around you that you just enjoy spending time with, so that your relationship, if you get into one, is a part of your social network and not sort of everything that you have, so that you're vulnerable if that relationship breaks up. And then there were people that, dated for a very long time in the military. And when they get out of the military, this has happened in every war, really. People have said, all right, time to move on with my life. Let's formalize this relationship, get married. And sometimes, even if people have been dating a very long time, they still don't know each other very well, because a lot of that relationship has been long distance or has occurred through deployments. So there's some vulnerability factors around that. And again, I really talk about how to proceed in a way that's well-informed, that minimizes your risk of making a regrettable decision for both people. And then for relationships that are even very strong and well-formed, it's still a time of unique vulnerability because all of the ways that you've related to each other get thrown into a blender, and all of your roles need to be renegotiated. You're moving, your whole life is changing, and so it's a time of very high stress when your roles are unclear and need to be renavigated. So there's a lot of things around healthy relationships for well-formed couples that I also try to address in this book.
One thing I really is, like you said, not putting all your eggs in one basket, all your money in one stock, is the scenario people can get into where all their social needs are being met with this one person they have this romantic relationship with. And it doesn't help them really progress in life at all because now they're just with this one person. They're not spending time with other friends, other things that really enrich their life. And so it seems like
Hmm.
it'd be much easier for them to just fall into an unhealthy relationship or one that's not that great and make a lot of compromises on their values or their own standards just to say, oh well, I'm with this person and this person wants to be with me, so I guess I'll let that one slide.
Yeah, and the really interesting thing is that there seemed to be, for many of my patients, almost a gravitational pull toward relationships that were chaotic, almost as though the chaos of that relationship gave them an opportunity in the guise of selfless service to come in and support someone. And that chaos had an organizing effect on their life for a time, but it's
Yeah.
incredibly dangerous in terms of the long-term stakes of, like you said, throwing all of your eggs in one basket, especially if that relationship is kind of chaotic.
I can see where people find the people they want to fix, and it also just takes
Hmm.
the focus on having to do the work on themselves. And this comes up in so many different ways, but it seems like it's definitely something that can happen when one is transitioning out of the military. And so it's much easier to deal with someone else's problems and put off dealing with your own.
Yep, that's exactly right. That it does, take the focus off yourself. And, as you said, diversifying is a way that we grow. And so you learn different things from different people in different relationships. And so if you're going to grow through the transition, that's another reason to have a network of relationships and really invest in that. It isn't just protective, it also promotes growth in different ways that we need as we go through life changes.
One thing I really like that you said is not to approach it as you are kind of hunting or, trying to win over somebody, but forming your life with all the different things or filling your days with all the different things that you like and want to explore and the things you want to be a part of. And these people will just present themselves in these situations. And so you're not trying to make it a competition or seek somebody out and maybe compromise your standards a little bit.
Yeah, the opposite of the gravitational pull towards people that are perhaps going to bring chaos into your life is the flip side of that, which is that if you fill out your life with interesting people and you live according to your deepest values, you will exert a magnetic pull on people that will find you to be a really desirable match for them. And people that are going to be looking for pairing with you for all the right reasons. So there's a whole genre of self-help books that basically teach people how to manipulate others to show that they are unavailable, so that they will be sort of like hunting them more, and
Ugh,
I just think that's
that's something that makes me want to
absolutely,
vomit.
yeah, yeah, just kind of throw up in your mouth a little bit. Um, not the right, not the right guidance at all. The right guidance at all is that your ability to walk away from a relationship allows you to build the best possible relationship because you won't settle and you'll push yourself to keep growing. And that's the best way to kind of develop a good relationship in the first place.
What do you think we're getting wrong about transition?
Well, I think, rather than saying, we're getting it wrong, I think we're looking at a part of it. And what we aim to do is complete the rest of the program that people need. So I absolutely think, and Jason would agree with me, that getting a job that's a good fit for who you are needs to be a part of transition. People's identity in their work is a huge part of their identity. And so the Transition Assistance Program right now is launching a very ambitious program that's innovative in a lot of ways around helping people meet potential employers and be really thoughtful about how that might fit for them or not. What they're trying to push for now is more of a thorough review of different possibilities that culminates in an event like that so that you're informed going in. And Jason and I really love that idea. So in our book, we have some forms that Jason wrote to help people think about different potential ways of engaging in work, in franchising, entrepreneurship, small business, nonprofits, bigger business, just different ways that they can engage. And so it would support what the TAP program is moving towards. But in addition, we really look at the side of transition that nobody's looked at in the kind of depth that we've looked at. The psychological, the cultural, and the relational parts of transitioning from the military. And so everything we've developed, I think, together with the things that TAP is going to be bringing forward, presents a game-changing way to look at transition.
What I love about this is that you guys are the perfect pair to have written this book, because Jason has the firsthand experience and getting out twice and, being in for a career. He has the experience of knowing the organizational structure of the military and how one actually transitions. What I love about your contribution to this is, relationships and the emotional struggle that people go through. And so putting you guys together to write this book, I thought it was a perfect combination.
Yeah, this has been such a fun partnership. Jason and I both have a real dedication to getting this right. It's just such a delight to work with someone that works that way, who comes to this with no ego, just a desire to get this right for the people that we're trying to support.
Shauna, who's this book for? Is it for people who have been in the military for an entire career, or someone who's been in for 4 years and gotten out after one enlistment?
We wrote this for anybody who wants to lead themselves through transition. So leadership is taking responsibility for your life and becoming the best person, best version of yourself that you can possibly be. So although some of this content was written from the perspective of a military leader, someone who's had 10 or more years in the service, I think there's so much in here that can be of benefit to people that have undergone transition, that may still be struggling. And I really wanted to get this out to the wives and the partners and husbands of those who are going through transition, as well as I could see companies really picking this up and buying it in bulk as a way to support in a fundamentally different way the veterans in their companies that are in transition, to help them lead themselves through this process.
Couldn't agree more. With that being said, let's get to my interview with Jason Roncoroni. Jason, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a great opportunity for me to talk with you today.
So like I said in the introduction, Jason's a retired lieutenant colonel and has gotten out of the Army twice. And you were the co-author of the book, Beyond the Military, and that is available now for everybody to purchase. I wanted to ask you a couple of things about this book and about yourself, because of the stories intertwine, obviously. What prompted you to write this book?
So the greatest thing that prompted me to write this book was my personal experience in going through transition. So when I left the first time, I had worked through a recruiting company. I was a junior captain in the Army. It was 2000 was the year. And I went to one career conference, and from that one career conference, I had 11 second interviews and 6 job offers. and all the job offers were for being an engineer, which my undergraduate degree was in engineering. So I figured that that's the employment path that I had to take. So when I got into that job, it took me about 3 months to realize that I really didn't like being an engineer. But the problem was I didn't know how to be anything else either.
Right.
And I didn't even know how to begin to look to be anything else.
So you felt kind of stuck in that pathway because hey, I got in this. I guess we're just going to write this one out.
Absolutely. And, so I started to think about going to business school because, well, maybe business is something that I can kind of get into, or that would give me different lanes. But at its core, I had no sense of identity for myself, because I went to West Point, 5 weeks after my 18th birthday. It was 2 weeks after I graduated from high school. So the Army gave me my sense of identity, and I didn't have one. So when 9/11 happened, I just ended up going back into the military until I retired. Because I felt like that was my obligation. That was how I could best fulfill my purpose, was by going back into the military. But as I went back into the military, I realized that, I needed to have some different things to my resume so that I had more options. So went back to school and got a degree in organizational psychology, and I got an MBA. And lo and behold, when I retired, I went through essentially the same thing. What I realized was that it wasn't the credentials that were giving me a hard time with transition. It was this deeper psychology of what was really going on with me. This identity crisis that I was struggling through was giving me my greatest problem with transition.
Right, because like you said, you internalize the Army values. It's easy to internalize the values because they're right there. They're presented to you. You memorize them. Most people literally recite them in their sleep. It's hard to separate who you are from who the person in uniform is. It's hard to even see that there might be a difference at all. How long did it take you to notice that you perhaps had slightly different values than just what the Army had instilled in you?
I would say that the light kind of came on for me when I was working in the first job that I had after I had retired. I'd taken a job as an executive director for a nationally recognized nonprofit, and I walked into that in the same way that I kind of walked into battalion command. Hey, I'm, not with the same mannerisms of being military, but with the idea of, okay, I'm in charge of an organization and our job is to serve this community. In the same way a battalion commander, serves the soldiers that are working there and the mission. And I realized that it didn't really apply to me in that particular situation. And I started to kind of, words that I used to kind of internalize, like integrity. I realized that, well, what's really important to me is integrity, but it's something different. It's about showing up authentically as who I am and honoring that in different scenarios. And so I really had this kind of conflict with my values to say, well, a lot of these military values aligned with me, which is why I was able to serve for 21 years in the Army, but it wasn't really who I was. And I was having a real hard time feeling that, okay, well, I can't follow that military path anymore. And I started to realize that there were these other things that really connected with me and these other things that were very important to me. And so that was really kind of when it happened for me.
So you're saying that the Army values, they didn't conflict with your own values, but in some ways they were not deep enough, or they varied differently. There was something missing that you had to figure out exactly how they applied to you rather than just reciting them and deciding that you agreed with them. What were some situations where you really noticed that come out, where you found out what was important to you and how that might have differed from who you were as a soldier?
So I think a lot of the situations that kind of came up in kind of the jobs that I was working was, in particular, this notion that I have of, service to others, which is different than selfless service. Because when you look at the idea of selfless service, you still have intentions, you still have desires, you still have your family. And like the military value of selfless service is very prescriptive as a leader. In other words, you come last, leaders eat last, you're the last one in line. Your job is to take care of everybody who is under your command. And when you leave, what I've realized is that the greatest way that you can serve society is by being the fullest expression of yourself, which is not selfless. And I wasn't able to really kind of step out and create a business. And I wasn't able to have the confidence to write this book until I was able to do that and say, you know what, I matter as well. And I can take care of others. And the best way that I can do that is by showcasing and expressing all the gifts that I have in society.
I found for myself that it was counterintuitive and it felt almost wrong at some points focusing on myself like that, because the altruistic or selfless service would come out and said, well, maybe I should be helping others, not realizing that the best way to do that, like you said, was to be focused on my unique talents and how I could bring that to the world by doing a deep dive into who I was and how I could harness those skills. So let me ask you this. What are some of the common mistakes people are making when they get out?
I think one of the greatest mistakes that people make as they're transitioning from the military is the connection between having a new job and successful transition. I think that having a good job or having a job lined up is a part of that process. But I also believe that it is a supporting and not the main effort. And I say that because both times that I left the military, I had a job lined up. You think that because I had the job lined up, if that is the measure of success, then I should have been successful. And in fact, I wasn't.
Internally, you just weren't satisfied and you weren't connected to what you were doing. It didn't bring you that fulfillment.
No, I wasn't happy. And it's one thing to not be happy, and it's entirely another to not know what's going to make you happy, which is what I think is when the transition process really kind of hits its lowest point. Because, like I said, it's one thing to be in a job and realize that, hey, this job isn't for me. But when you don't know where to go from that, that's when you truly feel lost. And the answer is that in order to find that path outward, you really have to look inward and look at yourself in ways that you haven't done through the military. Because as we've been talking about, there's this notion of selfless service through the military. And so the best way for you to find your path beyond the military is that it really has to start with this focus on yourself, the things that are important to you, your values, your purpose, your belief structure, your intentions, the factors that led to your success through the military, how those might apply after the military, your statement of intent for the second half of your life. These are all the things that you do that are independent of the career search process. The career search process is the outcome that supports that, not the other way around, which is where I think the transition process is flawed at this point.
I see. So you would base your career decisions on what you value internally. So you do the internal work first and then find the careers that align with that. Am I hearing you right?
That's absolutely correct.
How do people do that? I mean, I've identified my values, but I work, my day job is a therapist and I work for the VA. So that's part of my work. But for the normal people out there, how do you go about just identifying your values?
In the handbook, what we do is we go through this process, and I mirror the military decision-making process from the Army. And the reason why I do that is that I want to use a recognizable problem-solving process that military personnel, particularly in the Army, people who've worked on the Joint Staff and through the Marines, because it's more common, I know, in those services, I wanted to give them a familiar start point to kind of frame what they're going through with transition. And when you think about your purpose includes the reasons why you joined the military in the first place. It includes, kind of the role models and the things that have inspired you throughout your life. And so what we do is we start there to really kind of determine the why. And then we get into exercises that help service members identify their values. We address the fears directly that you have for the transition process. And when we talk about setting intentions, we're not talking about what answers the fear. What we want to do is we want to set and move that bar higher. So it's not just about what you think you need, but what do you really want in your life? When you look back on your life, what are the 3 words that you want people to use to best express who you are? How do you want your family to remember the person that you are? Tell me about the impact that you want to make with other people. Imagine what that best day might look like. And so the goal is to shift from this very negative fear-based mindset into this positive psychology, opportunity-based mindset, so that you can recognize things that you may not have seen before. Like, I never thought that I would run my own business. I never thought that I would write a book. And if you would have told me this 5 years ago, that I would be doing this, I'd say you were crazy. There's no way that I'm going to start my own business or write my own book. That's not me. And yet that's exactly where I am. And now that I'm on that path, I can't imagine a different path for myself. I couldn't imagine going to work for corporate America, but that was the fear that I had when I was in transition. It was like, you got to secure a job. It's got to pay you this much. You have to live in this location. And what I realized is that the best thing that I can do for my family is be the example of the person and the leader that I hope that they all become. And sometimes doing those kinds of things can be difficult, but that's the greatest gift that I can give them.
That unique path is especially difficult, I think, for vets, because we are used to an extreme and sometimes very rigid structure and pathways where we don't have to just create things on the spot. So the idea of trying to think for yourself, I remember for me, was a huge challenge, and trying to create my own identity, to decide like who I was versus how I wanted others to perceive me. What do you think you do differently if you were to get out today compared to when you got out after you retired?
You're the first person who's ever asked me that question, because I always talk about the problems that I had in the military and what I wish I had, but you're the first person who's ever asked me what would I have done differently. And I think the answer, and I think the handbook does a good job of this, is that I would have viewed opportunities through what I believe to be my most authentic identity, with an open mind. So rather than running to a job fair and talking to corporations based on things that they do or things that I might do for them, I would have really examined entrepreneurship, franchising, working for a nonprofit, the civil service sector, small business, large corporations, beginning from the framework of this is what's important to me and how does this align to what these organizations are offering me. And I would have addressed things like compensation, location, title later. And I think that I was focused on that kind of stuff first. And I think that that's kind of where I made my mistake.
So you saw things, you were looking at, you approached the situation with a lot of preconceived notions of how things should be in your mind. And maybe that limited the opportunities you could have had if you had considered other things that were less traditional, like entrepreneurship, or things you didn't have as much experience in.
Absolutely. And, when I look back on this and I look at the things that are most important to me and the kinds of environments where I really thrived in the military, and you look at the things that I did through transition, you'd been like, well, why did you make those decisions? Because clearly you're somebody who wants to think on their own. You're somebody who wants to be working in their passion every single day. And you said that the money initially is not important and you want to be able to control your own destiny. So why are you only applying at these 9-to-5 kind of jobs in corporate America where you're going to have a specific title and a very narrow focus? And so, but that's what I did. And, and so what the handbook tries to do is, after you go through this identity analysis, it presents you resources to kind of take a look at all of these different kinds of opportunities. And every single opportunity has 3 pluses and 2 challenge considerations. And that's done intentionally so that you can see every opportunity that's available to you as having more pluses than minuses, so that you have it with an open mind to step into it based on what best aligns to your unique identity.
Oh, I love that. And I love the practical application, because I have read so many self-help books, and I mean, people that listen to this show can probably identify. It's so easy to read a self-help book and then apply none of it and then just read the next one. It can be its own addiction and its own way of stalling out from any meaningful change in one's life.
Oh, absolutely. You could always find one more thing that you have to do before you really start moving. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. I know. Before you get your ass off the couch and start making those changes. One thing I noticed that stalled my reintegration into civilian life was this idea of what I should be thinking, how I should act, how I should dress, the opinions I should have as a Marine, as a veteran, and that conflicting a lot of times with how I actually felt or thought, and being worried that if I was not going the way I thought a veteran should go, I would lose part of that identity, or I would lose something really important to me. Almost like I had to just stick to an idea of who I thought I should be. Did you experience anything like that?
I think that what you're talking about right there is a critical part of the entire transition and reintegration process. And I think it's one of the things that we fundamentally do wrong right now across the country. And it's this idea of that when I leave the service, I'm starting over. And to answer your question directly, yes, I did have that. Because, you go through the military and you're recognized, and people really kind of see you as this heroic representation of the country. And you go off and you work with amazing people and you have great experiences and you feel like you've grown and you've internalized all this great stuff about who you are and the things that you're capable of doing. And, you have all of that. And so when you leave, this idea of starting over connotes this idea that I'm going to lose all of that.
Right.
And when we treat transition like, hey, you're going to end your military career and start something new, sometimes that's the implication that people take from that. And just like you were saying, I did that myself. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to reframe that to say that the military journey is only part of the larger journey, so that when you leave the military, it's not the end of anything. It's the continuation onto something bigger, which is an entirely different framework of thinking. Because now I say everything that I got in the military is really kind of that staircase that I'm walking up into something where I can be even a greater leader in society. I can impact not just the military and the veteran community, but I can also help civilians, corporations, small businesses. And that's where my leadership can be applied. So that when you look at my kind of the span of my leadership and my influence, it's actually bigger and extends further than what it did in the military, which is a much more positive and empowering way to look at transition. Because the fact is, transition is not the end of anything. And if you look at how primitive societies have treated the warrior caste, people left, returned from the battlefield, dropped their armor and their weapons, and they ascended into leadership roles within the social order. And that was intentional. It's so that they can take the military experience and apply it to the good of society. And that's the framework that I believe we should be looking at what military transition and reintegration is. And that's what we're trying to accomplish, or what I believe we do accomplish through this handbook.
Well, I love what you're talking about. And you have a way of translating people's skills and what they already know, and using familiar language and showing how that these things apply and how they apply in the civilian world. So in your opinion, what's a worse look? The guy who gets out and has the wannabe operator look with a huge beard and the high and tight, or the way too big backpack that always includes a knife and extra survival gear?
Well, I think that it really depends on is their intention of how they're showing up. Is the high and tight with the beard, is that really who they are? Or are they kind of projecting that persona? And same thing with the backpack. You know, is the backpack and that image that you're trying to project beneath it, is that the, hey, I'm not good enough, and so I need to project these things so that you can recognize me as this image or this symbol of something?
Oh,
and
exactly.
I think that that's one of the greatest things that limits men and women in transition, is because they don't have the confidence to step into who they really are. And again, that's why we really focus on the identity crisis part of this handbook, because you've got to be able to step confidently in who you are if you are going to really connect and inspire people as a veteran leader. So let's give them that framework. And if that's who they are, if that image of, you know, the high and tight, the beard, the big backpack is who they are, then you know what? Be it confidently and enjoy your life and go out there and do great things.
100% yes, because it's so cool when you see just the authenticity of that. When it's not authentic, that, like you said, people are pointing towards how they wish to be perceived. I think people can spot that.
Absolutely.
What are a few takeaways from the book, and what do you want people to walk away knowing after they read Beyond the Military?
I want them to have a better appreciation of the psychology of what's involved with the transition, to know how to repurpose everything that they did successfully through the military, all their experiences, and to have the courage to step confidently into a greater opportunity after military service. I want them to have confidence in being the example for their neighborhood, their community, their family, for what a leader should be in life after the military service, to inspire the best, you know, young recruits that were going to, you know, really kind of come up and carry on that legacy of military service. I really want to focus on our champions and build the bench of champions of military veterans and leaders across our society. And I believe that all of that starts with really having the confidence and the courage to step into who you are and going out and getting that done.
I love that. Where can people buy this book?
Well, the book's available on Amazon, and you can search it by Beyond the Military, or you can use my name, Jason Roncoroni, or Shauna Springer, and you can find it there.
And we'll have links to that in the show notes for everybody.
And so that's the easiest way to kind of get a copy of the book. And I'm encouraging everybody who works in the transition space to really kind of get this book. And I'm hoping that it informs the processes that people are using, because the goal is really to transform the space that's operating within the military world and the civilian world. And so the goal is I hope that people can see these things and they're inspired to come up with even better ways of helping people resolve the identity crisis and to build stronger relationships through this process. We want this book to be the catalyst for people to be better at this entire process.
So how can people get in contact with you, and what are you doing next that people should pay attention to?
People can get in contact with me by email. It's jason.roncoroni@ordinaryherocoaching.com, or they can reach me through my website at ordinaryherocoaching.com. And the next challenge that I have is that I'm working with a group of people about, I've talked a lot about this veteran leadership, and really kind of the next challenge that I want to address is how do we bring the best qualities of military leadership into civilian society? Because the military demographic is shrinking across our national landscape. Only 3% of veterans are a part of the active workforce. And so if you believe, as I do, that military leaders are supposed to ascend into leadership positions across society, with only 3 out of every 100 workers actually having served in the military, that's going to be hard to do. So the next challenge that I'm taking on is how can we build and harness that energy and present it to help educate, coach, teach, and mentor civilian leaders so that they have all those best qualities. And so that's kind of the next project that I'm on, which really builds off of this idea of military leaders becoming even greater veteran leaders in society.
I like that. Well, Jason, I want to thank you for your time today. And I'm so excited to read the rest of this book. And I don't say that lightly because there's not too many books I get excited about. This is something that's so sorely needed for all our vets. So I'm pumped for this book. Thank you. And I look forward to talking with you about it once I finished it.
Again, thank you so much for having me today. And, let's go out there and let's do some good for our veteran community.
All right, everyone, that'll do it for this week of Transitions from War. I want to thank Shauna and thank Jason again for the episode and all their work they're doing in the veteran community. Guys, go ahead and check out their book, Beyond the Military. Find it on Amazon. I'm going to link to that in the show notes, so go ahead and check that out. And go ahead and subscribe to the show, follow it. Find us on Facebook, Instagram. You can email me, mike@transitionsfromwar.com with any questions or ideas for the show. And please send the show to people you know who might need to listen to it. Leave us a rating and review on iTunes if you get a chance. And just thanks for listening. All right, everyone. See you next week. Bye-bye.